Congratulations to Vladimir Fedoseev to win Grand Chess Tour Superbet Poland Rapid and Blitz 2025. In this video, I will analyze the game between Vladimir Fedoseev against Alireza Firouzja in Game 18 on the tournament. Alireza as white and Fedoseev as black. White opens with his king's pawn, controlling the center. Black responds with the Sicilian defense, challenging white's central control and aiming for an asymmetrical pawn structure. White develops his knight to f3, controlling central squares. Black mirrors with his knight to c6, also aiming for central influence. White plays the Rossolimo variation of the Sicilian, developing his bishop to b5 and putting immediate pressure on black's knight on c6. Black develops his knight to f6, controlling central squares and preparing to castle. White captures the black knight on c6, giving up the bishop pair but potentially weakening black's pawn structure. Black recaptures with the d-pawn, creating doubled pawns on the c-file but opening the d-file for his rook. White pushes d3, opts for a solid, slightly passive setup, supporting his e-pawn and preparing to develop his pieces. Black develops his queen to c7. White push b3, preparing to fianchetto his bishop on the queenside, aiming for control of the long diagonal. Black also prepare to fianchetto his bishop on the kingside, supporting his f6 knight and preparing to castle kingside. White completes his queenside fianchetto. Black completes his kingside fianchetto, creating a solid defensive structure. White develops his knight to d2, preparing to support the center and potentially move to f1 or c4. Black castles kingside, bringing his king to safety. White develops his queen to e2. Now he has two options to castle. Black responds with a 5, plays a positional move on the queenside, potentially aiming to create weaknesses or expand his influence later. This make white think a while to castling queenside. White push a4 to prevent black from playing b5 and potentially cramping his queenside. Black moves his knight to h5, eyeing the f4 square and potentially looking to create threats on the kingside. By this move, black also challenged white to exchange the bishop. This is a brave move because dark square bishop is a great defender for the king. White captures the black bishop on g7. Black recaptures with his king. Now, black lost his defender and white lost his attacking bishop. The game continue. White moves his queen to e3, putting pressure on black's f4 knight and the d5 square. Black's knight still jumps to f4. White castles kingside, bringing his king to safety and connecting his rooks. Black plays b6, supporting a potential c5 advance later and controlling the c5 square. This pawn advance gives many options to develop the bishop. White develops his knight to c4, attacking black's b6 pawn and controlling key central squares. Black develops his rook to b8, putting pressure on the b-file and protect the pawn. White moves his knight from f3 to e5, controlling important central squares and putting pressure on black's knight. Therefore, black retreat his knight to e6. White pushes his f-pawn, trying to open lines on the kingside and create attacking opportunities. Black responds with b5, attacking white's knight on c4 and trying to gain space on the queenside. In this position, Alireza make a mistake. He captures the b5 pawn with his knight. Black recaptures with his queen. After that, white captures the pawn on c6, forking the queen and the rook. Black retreat the queen to c7 to protect the rook. White captures the rook on b8, gaining a significant material advantage, a rook for a knight. Black did not hurry to take the knight. He pushes his b-pawn, attacking to control the important squares. Anyway, there is no safe square for white's knight. White moves his rook to c1, controlling the c-file and preparing to participate in the attack. Black recaptures the knight on b8 with his queen. White plays c3 to open the file. Black captures the c3 pawn with his b-pawn, opening the b-file further. White captures the pawn with his rook, gaining another pawn. Black moves his queen to b4, attacking white's rook on c3 and the b3 pawn. In this position, the best move for white is rook c4 to maintain balanced position. But Alireza missed the best move. He moves his other rook to c1, doubling rooks on the c-file and putting significant pressure on black's position. Black develops his bishop to a 6, putting pressure on White's pawn on d3. White pushes his h-pawn, potentially aiming to create space on the kingside or provoke weaknesses. Black moves his queen to d4, challenging to exchange the queen. White captures the black queen with his queen, simplifying the position and gaining a significant material advantage. Black recaptures with his c-pawn, attacking the rook. Therefore, White moves his rook to c6, attacking Black's bishop. But Fedoseev doesn't care. He captures White's pawn with his knight, threatening to forking the king and the rook. So, Alireza moves his rook to d1, controlling the d-file, and Fedoseev captures Alireza's d3 pawn with his bishop. Alireza has no material advantage, but he has 2 passed pawn on the queenside. Alireza pushes his b-pawn, trying to promote the pawn. Black captures White's e4 pawn with his bishop to attack the rook and g2. White moves his rook to c7. Black moves his knight to d5, attacking White's rook again. White retreats his rook to c5, maintaining pressure on the d5 knight. Black pushes his e-pawn to support d-pawn. Because of the time pressure, Alireza makes a mistake again. Instead of pushing his b-pawn, he pushes his a-pawn, creating a passed pawn on the a-file. This permits Black to capture White's b4 pawn with his knight. White captures the e5 pawn with his rook to attack the bishop. But Black moves his bishop to c2, counter-attacking White's rook. If rook take on d4 pawn, Black has a strong attack with knight to c6, forking the rooks. And after the exchange, White lose 1 piece. Therefore, White moves his rook to d2. Black pushes his d-pawn, creating a passed pawn on the d-file. White moves his rook to c5 to restrict the knight. Black develops his rook to e8 to control e-file. White moves his king to f2 to activate it. Black activates his rook to e6. White puts his rook to c4 to attack the knight. But Black moves his knight to d5. White moves his rook to d4 to attack the knight again. But Black moves his knight to c3, threatening to forking the king and the rook. After this move, Alireza Firouzja resign. Let's see what happened next if king to f3.